to today's meeting of the Provo Design Review Committee. We'll kick off with just quick introductions and state whether or not we have any conflicts on this project. I'm James Hall and I don't have any conflicts.
I'm Carol Walker and I don't have any conflict.
Bruce Fallon, no conflicts.
Megan Geilman, no conflict.
Do you mind advancing the slides, Sandy? Okay. So item 1 today is Sierra Moore requests design review approval for a new 3-story office building in the SC2 zone located at 1255 South State Street.
Okay, thank you. So this project here is on South State here. The portion highlighted in red is the portion of the property, the green property that they own, that they would be developing at this time. So that's the part that we're going to be kind of focusing on here. Here's the landscape plan that they've provided. So the proposals to build a new office building on this property. And here's some renderings. I've put the materials board up there for you guys to take a look at the proposed materials on the exterior. And then on this one, it's going to be a little bit different for you guys than maybe what we typically see, in that this one's on a design corridor. So South State Street's a design corridor, and there's guidelines that I've included in the staff report for you to review. But specifically, the request that they're asking the design review committee for is a waiver of some of these requirements that are in that design corridor. And I've kind of highlighted them here. So part of your job with this review would be to determine whether or not you feel comfortable waiving these criteria. And if so, that you'd adopt some new findings showing the overall consistency with the guidelines that are in the design corridor as part of your motion. And so essentially what these ones that I've highlighted here with the bullet points are, and I highlighted in the staff report, are just ones that are kind of pertaining to what they're hoping to have waived. And that's regarding where the location of the parking is in front of the building. So on this design corridor, if you see here, here's the site plan. State Street over here on the left side is the design corridor. And so those highlighted bullet points are saying essentially that they don't want to have the parking located between the building and the street property line.
That's great.
They want the building to be pulled closer to the property line than what the zone requires. So the zone setback for the front yard is 20 feet. And the design corridor calls for, I believe it's 10 feet. Okay, yeah, design corridor of the front yard is 10 feet at minimum and a maximum of 20. So essentially, I'll just zoom in on this. The next slide's going to zoom in on the portion of the front there. So we can take a better look at those setbacks. So the current setback from the red property line in the zone would be 20 feet. That would be front yard where there wouldn't be parking. The design corridor is saying to bring it closer to that 10 feet or 20 feet maximum with no parking in that area. Essentially having the building there and all the parking back behind is the goal for the corridor. As properties develop over time, that's kind of the design that the corridor would take on. But there is a provision, like I mentioned, for you as the design review committee to decide if there's enough reasons forego those criteria and waive those and allow for what the applicant's proposing here. So that's kind of the request before you today on this. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those. If not, I know the applicant has some slides that they wanted to go through as well.
So in terms of from planning perspective, what's the philosophy or thought process behind those requirements? Why is it important to the city to have that in this particular location?
Yeah, so the city establishes design corridors to help have some conformity and some kind of a unified design on certain corridors in the city. And so on this one, by bringing a building closer to the street, you're helping to kind of create more of a pedestrian friendly environment. So you're not seeing parking lots and have everything be auto oriented, but you're seeing that more pedestrian scale and articulation through design. That's probably, I guess, the biggest one is to help with that component of it. Does that kind of help answer the
Kind of, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, well, you can finish, then I'll talk. I just really like not having parking in front of the building. I think it's such a nice feeling. So I do like that aspect. And is it a safety issue to be 10 or that 20 feet where State Street's such a busy street? That would be my concern.
safety for travel?
Well, if there's pedestrians and traffic getting off the street, going back on the street.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess for safety, limiting the amount of vehicle pedestrian interaction crossings, so on this, for example, there's 2 driveways off of State Street that would cross the sidewalk to get to
Will you highlight those?
So down
Put
here on
your-
the bottom.
Right there, okay.
And then up here.
Down there, okay.
Yep, those 2 spots would be ingress, egress for the parking. It is also something Public Works is going to be, or has kind of mentioned it, since State Street's a UDOT road, UDOT might not allow 2 ingress, egress on this property. And so that's something that still has to be worked out as they go forward with their project plan. So potentially that would be maybe more looking at having just 1 up on the north side of the property so they could also service that larger property that we were looking at.
Does UDOT,
Here.
would they have an issue with us or with them going 10 feet instead of 20 feet? Is that an issue that would affect UDOT would have some say on it?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't
Okay.
think that they would necessarily have an issue with the building location, other than maybe like on a corner where clear vision or something, but our Public Works engineering would be looking at those as well. So I think it's more just the number of access points to this property would be what they're looking at. So as far as safety goes, being able to limit the number of those is obviously going to help with that safety component that you're asking about, so that there's less pedestrian vehicular conflicts. And so what that could look like if you were to approve something with keeping the parking in the front, but maybe not having this second drive access and they have a turnaround or something there. That would be a safer situation for pedestrians. But I mean, it's obviously, a handful of parking stalls there too. So it's not
an in your face kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is the distance from the intersection to the driveway meet city standards then?
Yeah, as far as I know Public Works is also reviewing the plans. And so if there are issues with that, they would bring those up. I haven't heard if there's that concern at this point.
A few other questions. If we do choose to approve the deviation from the plan, are we amending the plan itself or just approving this one instance of departure?
You would be approving it for this property, what they've proposed, or you could do a modification of something and then just state new findings of of, how those changes or how the intent of the design corridor can still be met by allowing a change or a modification to what it's calling for.
Okay. And do you know if there's much precedent? I'm trying to think along State Street for maybe before the design guidelines were in place. So there's other properties that kind of follow this pattern or?
Yeah, I wasn't around when they designed or created the design corridor. It is something that, to get that uniformity along the whole corridor is going to take decades as properties redevelop over time to kind of make that shift to have that uniform look and feel to the corridor. So it will be for some time where you have building setback and some that newer ones that are brought closer and parking put in the back. Those type of changes will take time. But this is the opportunity to either stick with that or alternative.
And then one other question that may be hard to answer. Do we know kind of what the long-term plan is for state and if we're going to try and slow traffic? Right now, like it's not a very hospitable pedestrian experience, not necessarily because of the architecture, but because of like, what is it, 5 lanes of with the middle turning lane of high-speed traffic. I'm not sure if the transportation plan has any long-term changes for that road specifically.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I guess I'm not up to speed on what the future plan is for this corridor. But we can look into that if needs be to get more information for you.
I'm sorry, thanks. Yep. Okay, should we hear from the team? Yeah, if you could just give us some context on the project, and it'd be great too to hear more about the reasoning for putting some of the parking and asking for the change in the design.
Sure. So just a quick introduction, Nick Sly with Apex Development and Consulting, acting as a developer for the project. We've hired MHTN, Robert Pinions here, that's going to help us with that, as well as Kyle Terry from Westland Construction, who would be the CMGC for the project. So a lot to what you're saying there. Really what we want to focus on is just our reasonings behind it. And I'll let Robert probably speak more eloquently to this. It's really just kind of a design fit and feel for the client that we're currently working for, looking towards building it to. They don't have a lot of customer in and out and access, which is why most of the parking out back makes all the sense in the world for employees and everything like that, but just very minimal. And so just for the fit and feel of the building, just made sense for us to have that out front. We feel like it makes it look a lot better and a lot more inviting, especially for anybody that's, walking along State Street as well. Those are, that was kind of our initial push for that. I think it looks better, feels better for us, feels better for the client. Something that I really would love to push for if at all possible. And I'll let Robert speak a little bit more to that.
Thank you, Nick. Robert Pignon with MHTN Architects. I think that the key here that we're trying to convey is that if we fully endorse what it is that the design corridor is trying to do, we have to acknowledge that people aren't going to be walking to the front door in this design. And so in order for the experience to feel right, what we have provided is a single loaded drive aisle with our ADA parking and guest parking. This is a place where people that are coming here for the first time will easily find the front door. And as such, we have the entry door on the State Street side, and then the employee door on the back. Our reception desk does face both sides, and we want that to be easy for wayfinding. So they're located right in the middle, and we do have plans. So this is our landscape plan, some axonometrics. But as we look at the floor plan, you can see that this center section is the reception area. So you have employees coming in, and then you have the public coming in as they visit the space.
So this, you're building it for somebody that will be in the building. They
Right,
have the whole building?
they have the whole building.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. So you're building it specifically for a company, and will they have the whole building?
The whole building.
Okay, thank you.
I've got yellow markings on here. I don't know if that's easy to delete. Okay, we'll just ignore them here. Going back to the landscape plan, the intent is for the corner to respect that intersection. And as you can see on the side yard, we did pull the building as far down as possible. Please note that we will have power lines that are on that edge of sidewalk. And so we've tried to pull that as far as we can. But the idea here is, if we're going to have an entrance on State Street, how do we make it welcoming for someone that's never been there before? How do we allow the people that are coming via vehicle to find the entrance easily, and not necessarily load this with a ton of parking, but just enough visitor parking? And so the building faces State Street in a very magnificent, elegant way, scaled, so that it does have a sense of pedestrian. And I'm looking at the top left. Is there a way to zoom in? No. So basically the first floor is all glass from floor to soffit. And then after that, we have punched openings. But we do want the people that are, whether they're traveling on by foot, bicycle, or car, to feel like this isn't just a large monolithic building, that there is a sense of scale to what we've done on the first floor and then the upper floors. The parking in the back is going to work just fine for us. We have some covered parking. We'll have EV chargers. We've got a lot of amenities for those people that are going to be coming to this destination. And we feel like pushing the building back just enough to get that single drive aisle is going to make this a more welcoming destination, rather than just a building placed right up against the road. And Carol, I do want to agree with you, in a pedestrian friendly location like this street, the front door, as far close right up to the street, is very welcoming. Unfortunately, 1855 South State, it's not going to be a pedestrian destination. And so with that, we would request the variance on that design guideline so that we can accomplish a nice front door that works.
Robert, can you talk to the building materials? Because I think that's another element that seems in variance with the design guidelines, because it doesn't talk about metal as being a primary, but it appears that you're doing, is it all ACM?
It's mostly ACM with a lot of glass. So
and again, I
aluminum
don't have a
panel.
problem with ACM. It's just a comparison with what's.
We do
sitting in
have
front of me.
some wood materials on the underside of soffits. We have 3 or 4 different aluminum colors that have been submitted on the materials board. I don't know if you guys had those.
They're all sitting right in front
You
of us.
could touch them and feel them,
Yep.
right?
Anybody want
And the idea here is that we want it to look fresh and clean. A look that very much says corporate headquarters for the tenant that we're working with. Some of the elevations, perspectives from the intersection and from the street.
I think the other element in the code, again, I'm just comparing the code. It's just variation in roof lines. You have the one entry element that pops you taller there, but otherwise that's it. So it seems like that's another element that seems to be at odds with what's being asked in the design guidelines.
Noted. We do have some variation in the metal panels that are going to be interesting. The black section versus the fish scales versus the rest of it that's in standard ACM.
Yeah.
And then you can see the canopy, and the underside of that would be wood. We can provide these in color renderings. We intentionally left them black and white so that it wouldn't be a distraction, but you are seeing the materials as we've depicted them in front of you.
So the red on the paper copy, that's the one on the top two that you've got up right now. And is that the front?
This is the front towards State
Okay.
Street.
That looks really nice.
And the back is what's facing the mountains, which really
Going
takes
like
advantage
that,
of the
yeah.
views. And it was very intentionally done rather than just a rectangular building. A lot of focus on views and daylight penetration, so the floor plate is not very wide, but is articulated to really create a nice environment for the tenant.
Is that bird, is that part of the materials?
It is, it's an aluminum
Okay.
and it represents the tenant's logo.
I'm a little concerned about that because if they ever move, I don't know, it's still part of the building, but
It could be removed. I mean, it's just a
Okay.
cladding.
okay.
Yeah.
So that was my question.
And the tenant is going to be the owner as a turnkey.
Okay, any other questions before we discuss? Okay. And do we do public comment now or later? Now, okay, I don't think there's anyone here to comment, so we'll acknowledge no one's here for public comment. I will chime in. I was in the neighborhood committee meeting where you presented a couple weeks ago. There was concern that it wasn't a grocery store, but other than that, I mean, that's kind of difficult.
Was not.
It's not a grocery store. That's something that,
That was a concern for you.
well, for South Provo residents, they're definitely interested in getting a grocery store there. But aside from that, there weren't any concerns about the design or the layout. So should we talk generally about design first and then maybe get into the potential adjustments to the design plan for that design corridor? I think maybe the only design specific critique was variance in heights. Did look like in one of the views, there might be a section that could be a little more flexible on height. So in the bottom rendering here on the right side, I don't know if that can drop a little bit because there's some good material differentiation. Yeah, I don't know what's inside there necessarily to comment on whether it works with your program, but
Looks like a stair.
Can I make a comment? So, yeah, just you're talking about the stair wing that pops out on that side, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so you're just saying maybe drop that in elevation just to
Or-
get a little bit of variance in it, maybe. Okay,
yeah,
I just wanted to
and
make sure.
I wouldn't
clarified.
propose that as a requirement, but maybe just a
Just a look. Okay.
suggestion. And I do like the orientation towards the mountains. Obviously, it's a great site and we'll have some nice views back up onto the mountains. Any other thoughts or concerns about materials or design?
I mean, I think what's been developed here from an architectural perspective is lovely. I think there's some really nice choices and decisions there. And again, my reaction is mostly just in response to what the code requires. So, you know, from a material perspective, very appropriate for it, what its use is. You know, it may be a little foreign in the neighborhood, but the whole context of Dustin's discussion regarding the long-term, you know, transformation of that, it will change. So I don't have a problem allowing the use of the materials that have been submitted. You know, the use of the red's nice. It's not in your face, kind of screaming. I'm a big proponent of color though. So that's an element that I like to see. And in terms of the variation of the heights, you know, you've done that at the entry. And in some ways, the screening that you have at I think it's the basketball court on the right-hand side there, kind of provides almost some variation in height and breaks that facade up nicely. And then you've got the canopy up front, which does comply with what's required from an entrance perspective in the code. So I think at the end of the day, I could convince myself pretty easily to be okay with all of it's been.
I really like the fact that you have a lot of different texture, different colors of materials. And also, I think it will kind of increase the value of that part of State Street, South State Street. We get a new building like this and others might downgrade their buildings or others coming in. So,
Yeah, I agree. It sets a nice precedent for future growth there. And- Okay, so I think from a design perspective, we're on board. Speaking more specifically about the setback adjustment, any initial thoughts or concerns?
I just want to be clear. So you want to go only 10 feet and right now it requires 20 feet, or do I have that backwards?
No,
They
the-
want this parking here in the top left.
Can you go back, Sandra? Can you go to the site plan? So the requirement
the
is for it to
front.
be, the front of the building be 10 to 20 feet from the property line. And
Right.
it's probably
Okay.
80 feet. I don't know. Is that about right, Robert? 70 to 80 feet. So it's much further away from the street than what the requirements are.
Oh, instead of it being
Instead of
closer
it
to the
being right
street,
up
you're
front, yeah.
back.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
So. I mean, I'm curious about the two things that you talked about, Dustin, in terms of UDOT's willingness to, they're not always easy to, and they don't like very many penetrations in their roadways. So, I mean, do you guys programmatically from a functional perspective see any issues if that driveway went away? And here's my thought process, Robert. Sorry, we know each other from serving in AIA in a long time. So, is the opportunity is there to extend the street experience. If that's truly the intent of this design corridor, to me, the pedestrian experience happens at the sidewalk in between the trees. And so if we could make that a little more continuous by eliminating that southern driveway, I think that would help make it more comfortable. Now, I also recognize that becomes problematic from a turnaround and you get stuck down that. So, there's some ease of transportation, but if what you've said is in terms of not having visitors come very often, it may not be that big of a deal. So anyway, that's my question.
Right. I just wanted to mention the south curb cut is existing
Mhm.
and it is not 200 feet from the intersection. So UDOT could have a position, but at the same time, it's existing. They like to call for 200 feet. As we were talking over here, if UDOT forced us to close the south and only have the north and we turn to Hammerhead at the end of that, I think it's still a win for us because it becomes an easy in and a way to sign that this is the front visitor's entrance. And I think it still accomplishes what we're trying to do. And so I think we're at the mercy of UDOT, and I think we'll be able to solve the issue with them as that happens.
Oh, okay. I think I would make a suggestion that we recommend that to pursue that. The only other question, this is maybe totally unrelated here. All your accessible stalls are in the front. That means there's no accessible stalls for employees in the back. Have you guys talked through that? I know.
The idea would be that the employees' accessible stalls are in the front. I think what we're trying to do is limit the amount of cross traffic in the back because we don't have any stalls that are entering into on the west side of that drive aisle. So if needed, that's where the ADA accessible stalls would be for employees.
Again,
It's shorter, easier for them to come in. I do want to say that our accessible route is available on the back, but we didn't feel like that distance would be convenient. So we put them all in the front.
Okay. Dumb architect's curiosity, sorry.
I think my only concern about the pedestrian access, even though it's probably not the primary means of accessing the building, is it's only shown through the parking lot right now. And there's no sidewalk that would be separate from cars. I may just be misinterpreting it, but I don't see a sidewalk on the site plan.
It's there.
It is there.
Yeah, you can see it.
Well, but from alongside the south entrance to the front of the building,
Yeah.
which to me would be kind of the most logical place to put that. If I were walking, I would kind of be looking for that. Yeah, I'm personally kind of at a loss on this because I haven't thought more broadly about the long-term like State Street plan and how disruptive this could be to that plan if we were to approve it. I would say if we do approve it, I would want to see an additional sidewalk there and maybe a little bit of landscaping adjustment to make that a nice path that like helps them welcome them from the desert that is walking along State Street into hopefully what would be this oasis. But yeah, any other comments or concerns?
Is there a sidewalk along State Street? Just some of it, all the way?
Most of it.
Okay.
I would also second adding a sidewalk up to the front entrance. So, other than that, I don't have any problems with it.
Dustin, do you have any additional guidance you want to offer before we, like, I think consensus feels like we're okay with approving this. But I want to make sure we're not about to commit an egregious mistake that sets precedent for the future that we regret.
Well, I mean, in some ways, we're saying we don't necessarily agree with the standard that was established for this design corridor. So it's a little precedent setting and impacts probably what your future work looks like. But I think at the end of the day, for me at least, I have a hard time envisioning South State Street being much different than what it already is. You know,
Sure.
the likelihood of UDOT saying, hey, let's add some, I mean, I say this, but anyway, let's add some, you know, islands down the middle and bulb outs to make it more pedestrian friendly down State Street of this part of town. I lack vision, I guess.
Yeah. And I mentioned, you know, the pedestrian friendly element as far as, I guess, one aspect of it. The other is, you know, just being a corridor in general. You know, South State Street is kind of the entrance into our city. It's one of the things that we're looking at right now as we're working on our gateway and corridor plan for the city. So it really is, you know, hopefully going to improve over time and not necessarily stay how it has been. You know, they're along State Street. They have included a significantly wider sidewalk as a trail corridor as well. So there are things in the plans as far as South State Street goes to really try to improve the look and enhance the experience as you enter into Provo and really give a good impression of our city as you come into Provo from South State Street. So the design corridors are something that help create that feel, you know, that sense of arrival and that sense of place that you've actually arrived somewhere and you're not just, you know, traveling along a state highway necessarily, but that we can have some guidelines that help as properties develop or redevelop to really kind of hone in on that experience for not necessarily pedestrians, but anyone that travels into the city. You don't necessarily have to be walking on the sidewalk to get a sense of arrival or a sense of place. And so I think that's kind of what these design corridors help do. And so, you know, I think there's quite a few places in that code where it mentions no parking in the front, not just one time, but as I was writing, I was like, oh, it's like 2 or 3 times in here. So I think that's kind of a big point of the design corridor. As they've mentioned, kind of looking back at it, if these are all, you know, rarely used visitor parking stalls or ADA accessible stalls, you know, it's not much.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So I know there's been a lot of discussion on the entry for west coming in off the freeway. So I'm glad to know you're working on doing something for the approach. And I think it's like you want it to be a destination, like they come, they want to stay. And I just think this particular building will really help add to that.
Yeah, and that's why I think bringing the buildings to the street, like the guidelines are saying, help to do that, help create that enclosure so that you feel that sense of arrival to something different than maybe industrial buildings that are sent way back from property lines and things like that. So having those design corridor elements are helpful. But if you feel that there's some special circumstances that help create a better design, then in the motion, you could articulate what those are, and that's what we'd be looking for on this one.
What are the setbacks on the south side? I don't know what road that is off the top of my head, so.
I didn't those for this, but I would imagine that they'd be, since it is a corner, so it's a street side yard, it would probably be comparable to the front setback, which would be the 20 feet on Center Street. So my guess is that it's 20 feet on that street on the south as well.
I guess I'm looking at the big landscape area. Go back if you would. Sorry. Looking at the big landscape area, and again, programmatically, I don't know how that would work for you to pull your building, that portion of the building. I'm sure you have a reason why you can't do it. So Nick, you're gonna have to come up and talk.
There's some transmission lines that come down currently and that cut right through the building. So have a current contract with Rocky Mountain Power to move those lines, and then they'd have to come down this south property line. So we literally are pulled as close as we can be with their, it's like 50 feet, 25 on each side of the transmission lines. And that's what kind of set our lines.
Do they run down State Street, or I'm not?
So they actually had came through that property and then cut across, and then they start going down Straight Street past that. So we're running it out on the back side of our parking lot and then coming up our south property line and then cutting and reconnecting at those same points. So. But that's really what's dictating our setback on that south side.
Is that what's running along the tree line there down the middle? I'm just looking at the aerial map, sorry. So you see that tree line?
Yeah, you see that on that right there. You can see where it comes down, and then it really kind of goes right through that area, right where our building would be, and then connects and goes to the south of the other road. So.
And it's being rerouted where? Sorry, I'm sorry that I'm a little slow.
So the islands on this back side of the parking lot next to the drive aisle, we are placing those new poles in those islands as it comes down that east property line. So basically these islands right here. Okay. So we're going to come down here, get to this, and then we're going to come this way, and then it cuts back across the road.
So my question then, I get that part of it, because again, I've dealt with the same thing. The west elevation is where I was wondering if that could be accommodated to get a little bit closer to what's desired, so that as you're approaching the building from the south, you then have the building that's close, it then steps back for where the parking is. Again, I don't know if that programmatically, I'm sure there's.
You're saying, just so I'm clear, like right in this section?
Yes, sir.
Bringing that a little farther this way.
Yeah. And again, I don't know how that impacts your program, but it would be a challenge. Yeah, I know. It's just basketball courts. Just trying to see if there's a way of balancing the needs that you guys have, which I totally respect. And I understand the intent of the design corridor guidelines. So I just didn't know if there was a way of juggling those two.
And I don't think it'd be an issue with this one building, but if we had to, like, if we did set that precedent and got all these buildings set back, it would, we talked about having, or the positives of an eclectic look over time. And so I don't have any issue with this one building, but I wouldn't want them all to be like that or setback.
All right, so it sounds like there's sort of three things that we've discussed so far as changes. One is adding a sidewalk, and that seems pretty straightforward, pretty reasonable. The next is pulling that sort of southwest facing facade closer to the street. And there's only two things. Anything else?
Oh, we talked about the driveway.
And the driveway. And the driveway was already there, but you were thinking that
I'm a troublemaker. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead if you
Robert.
have something to say.
If I just may quickly speak to pulling that corner, I think from an interior layout, it would be a challenge to try to address pulling that southwest corner out. So that bump out that sticks out is our core component, our central stair, our core mechanical restrooms, and then with that is the alignment of how the spaces work on the inside. So I would just ask, with that suggestion, it may be more complicated at the end of the day for us than something that could bring that value in. I also worry about how abruptly it would transition the corner, and it would maybe feel a little too forced in terms of the overall design intent.
Like I said,
That's
I'm
a
just a
good
troublemaker.
point. I think that's a good point that you've got.
So you'd
Look
be
at that.
you'd be pulling on the top left, you'd be pulling that right corner really far forward, and we would lose the prominence of that center dark section, which is the brand of the building.
Mhm.
I'm glad you didn't roll your eyes, Robert, when I made that suggestion. So
All right, so deliberation. I think we all like the building. We want the building to be there. It's a nice addition to State Street. Do we want, I think it's fair to require sidewalk and landscaping to make pedestrian access more nice. Do we want to make the requirement on the second driveway or make it a recommendation?
I think they'll work through that between UDOT and city standards. So
I think that's the issue is yes, 2 driveways is the best if UDOT will allow it, right?
Okay. Yeah, I feel torn because I know this is a bigger decision than just this single project, right? And the precedent that it might set for parking in the front. I understand the motivation for the parking in the front. I think the justification of public versus private and employee versus visitor makes a lot of sense. So
I mean, the reality of it is, even though the building is pulled back further, the fact that they've limited, I mean, they could have run parking the entire length, but they didn't. And so I think I like that. That's another balancing act that was done there to try and make that reasonable, and the pedestrian experience with all the landscaping there will make that corner nice. So I think if I were making a motion, and I don't know if we're at that point or not, James, but I'd make a motion to recommend approval of the project. I guess I don't know, we're not a recommending body. Sorry, it's my years on planning commission, I guess. Anyway, to approve the project with the deviations as outlined in the staff report regarding the setback of the building to allow. And again, I think the precedent that I want to make sure we could do is that we're not saying that we're comfortable with parking over the entire front, but whatever that percentage is, maybe half of it. I mean, I think there's a functional and a rational reason to allow that to happen in terms of pedestrian access. In terms of, I mean, if there's no, I mean, I guess you could have an entrance there, but again, it's going to be 20, 30 years before you have enough pedestrian traffic to justify having a building entrance on the front side that's pulled 10 feet away from the parking lot. So I don't know if does that articulate enough, Dustin, in terms of what staff needs us to say?
Yeah, just make sure I understand. So you're saying motion to approve the design as they've shown. Just jump back here with the requirement that a sidewalk is put in from the State Street sidewalk to that front entrance.
Correct.
And then was there
and then just for me, it's a suggestion to remove that driveway. Okay. Even I know it's existing, but to remove the driveway, but allow the process with the Public Works and UDOT to kind of guide that.
Okay. And then was there another component to that?
Earlier, we discussed a recommendation for more height variance as well. Not a requirement, but a recommendation to just make the facade a little more dynamic.
I'd add that to my motion.
So are you saying to eliminate one of the driveways, so there's only one driveway?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Because there are
I
multiple
would-
points of access to the parking lot because they have it off of 1320 South.
okay,
They've got
so
2
there's
points.
other access.
Correct. I would guess that 90% of their traffic will come
Oh.
off of 1320 South to the back side of the building. So
Thank you.
And then a clarification earlier, you brought something to my attention that I wasn't aware of in the design standards about the materials. And you had talked about
and again, I
being able to.
would allow that just based off of the specific use that's being proposed here as being an appropriate material for that type of a building.
I think that clarifies all those. So the,
And we're allowing exceptions. We're not amending the design world, right? Okay.
No, yeah, we're not changing the design corridor standards. That We're basically giving them an exception to those standards.
Yep.
Okay.
Does that capture it, Sandy, in terms of the motion? We can talk after if you need to. Yep. Okay.
Okay, any seconds? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay. And I believe that's our only item for today, correct?
I make a motion
Okay.
to adjourn then.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.